The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the co-founder of Financing Solutions, and for the last 14 years, we have been the largest provider of lines of credit to small nonprofits in the United States. We have thousands of clients. The line of credit is a great solution for nonprofits who have uneven cash flow. If you think you're unique in that you have uneven cash flow, you're not. It's so common. And that's what exactly a line of credit is designed for, is to help you through those times when you are low on cash and you got to make payroll, or you have an emergency, you got to keep the program going, those type of things. And if you're interested in learning more about the product, please visit us at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Ange Adamak and from Arts and Scraps. And today we're going to be talking about keys to growing a small nonprofit. Ange is the executive director of Arts and Crafts. She is passionate about environmentalism, creativity, and educational equity. She has worked with children and volunteers for over 20 years and in a variety of different positions. And she's worked in administration also for over a decade. Ange is most excited about the community strength we collectively create when we come together for impact. Ange, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So you're calling in from Michigan. And so what's the degrees? What's the temperature? It's winter. So what's the degrees out there right now?
I think the low today was 1 degree. So, and I think the high was like 11.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm in New Jersey. It's 26 degrees, very windy. There's only 11 states I haven't been to. Michigan is one of them. I hear it's gorgeous.
Oh,
yeah, and I definitely, but I don't think I'm going to go there in February. I'm going to go there.
Come in the summer. It is magical in the summer.
Yeah, I hear, but it's like Seattle. You get 6 weeks a year out of beautiful weather.
I don't know if it's 6. But
6.5.
I would say, it's probably like 10.
Yeah. I hear it's fantastic during that time. It's just like, I went to Seattle when we went, it was in August, and there was no rain for 10 days while we were there. And I was like, what is everybody talking about the rain? And they're like, yeah, you got the 10 perfect days in August.
Exactly.
So
yeah, Michigan is for lovers of seasons. If you love a seasonal activity, it's the perfect place to live. If you're like, oh, in the winter I get to ski, and in the fall I get to apple pick, and so it's perfect for the person that loves the changing. I love the changing of the seasons.
Yeah, I like the changing of the seasons too, but not when it's -1 or whatever it won. So yeah, at least I'm 26 over here degrees. Yeah, so and that's cold. But anyway, I like to change the seasons too as well. So let's jump right into our topic about keys to growing a small nonprofit, which is really near and dear to my heart. I mean, we've done 350 episodes of the Nonprofit MBA podcast, and I think growing a small nonprofit is something that I think that I've seen over the 14 years. What it takes. So if you had to describe 3 keys to a successful nonprofit growing as a small nonprofit to a bigger nonprofit, and let's define that. When I think of a small nonprofit, I'm thinking about, especially with our target audience that we're here with, because our target audience typically is 3 million in revenue and less. Really, so when we're talking about a nonprofit in the $100,000 range of revenue a year, and they want to get over $1 million, go over $2 million. Is that fair to say that's kind of a small nonprofit?
Yeah, and I would even say, so we just crossed over 500,000 2 years ago, and even just getting to that hump, like there's almost like a little glass ceiling for $500,000 where people don't necessarily understand who you are and what you want to do until you cross that threshold that they're like, oh, okay, I'll maybe take you a little more seriously. I think there's a kind of that same glass ceiling at like 50K, and then it's like 500K. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's it's
and then it's a
50K.
million, right? And then it's a
Yeah.
million. So, but once you hit those glass ceilings and then can come over them, it's really interesting how differently people start to interact with you. So
Yeah, in small businesses, which I know a lot about because I've built a number of them, the magic number is 1 million in revenue. That's a small business. And then when you get to 5 million and the reason why the $5 million mark is a big number is that's when you usually hire a second in command. That's,
mhm.
so maybe at that point, like what we're talking about is when a nonprofit gets to be $1 million in revenue. Um, at that point, maybe you're able to bring on a fundraiser, someone who's in charge of fundraising. I don't know. What do you think? There's a
Well, I was
magic
going
number?
to say, I think it really depends on the model in the nonprofit world, right? Like for Arts and Scraps, we're almost 50% earned income and 50% unearned income. And that's it's not unique, but it's fairly unusual, right?
Yep.
And so our model is a little bit different. And so what it looked like to get to 500,000 and what it'll look like to get to 1 million is going to look different than other places. And I think that is what is unique about nonprofits to small businesses is our models can look so different because our goal is not necessarily fully just profit, right? And so I would say, yeah, even in the nonprofit world, though, they define a small nonprofit as $1 million, and so I think a mid-size is 3 million and a large is 10. So
That's very similar to small businesses. And by the
yep,
way, someone who's at 1 million or 3 million at revenue, it does depend on the industry. For a for-profit business, they're not making any money.
yes,
They're just trying to get to that next level where
yes,
then they can start saying they're making some money. So it's not really relevant to this conversation,
yeah.
but
But
the
in a way
civil.
it is, because honestly, part of why I wanted to talk about this topic is Arts and Scraps is a small nonprofit that works with even smaller nonprofits. And it's really interesting to see how many organizations there are out there that are don't even have 50,000 in revenue, but
Oh
have
yeah,
more impact than organizations that are 500,000, right? And
yeah.
so they don't have the tools, the keys to grow that income, that revenue the way that they need to. And for us specifically, we were an organization that was kind of stuck at like 280 for like 2 decades and finally kind of broke the mold on how to change that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So let's talk about the number one most important thing to that you've seen to grow a small nonprofit. What's the number one most important thing?
I would say my belief is that it's story building and storytelling. And that can be marketing, like pure, social media, or it could be PR, or it could be a combination of all of the different types of marketing. But I think, and you can get creative about how you do it. But I think at the end of the day, you have to not only tell your story, but have a story to tell in order to move that forward. And understanding what your story uh, is is vital to that. So for Arts and Scraps, we were an organization that was so busy doing, so busy being in the community, doing the work that we were doing, that we weren't telling our story at all, even though we had a million stories to tell. And once we kind of cracked that code of what is the impact that we're having and how do we tell that story, that's when we started to gain donors. That's when we started to connect differently with foundations, corporations, sponsors, etc. And that really started to move the needle for Arts and Scraps so that we could build the other pieces that were important for us to build in order to grow. So to me, that number one piece is learning what your story is and how you're going to tell it, which sounds very, very simple, but isn't. You may have to change your whole business model in order to do that. um,
Yeah.
and I know that was true for us.
Why do you think storytelling do you think storytelling is the right word for this?
Mm.
Do you think it's marketing and the part of marketing is storytelling? Or if you think it's storytelling, that's fine. Uh, is it chicken or the egg? But I, I think what you're talking about is having a marketing plan and executing it super well. And part of that marketing plan is being able to tell your story that's real, that's not made up, that
Yes.
has data, is compelling, that is true to the culture of your organization, that you understand the culture of your organization is that everybody in your organization understands the culture, they understand your story. Is that fair to say?
I think the reason that I use the word storytelling instead of marketing is that creative aspect that depending on your organization, it may look very different than traditional marketing. So for us, it has meant programming that we got grant funded, that helped us connect to our community in a completely different way. It meant community engagement that helped us understand what our impact was and what our impact could be if we switched up our model a little bit. It meant grassroots input from the community to help us be able to tell our story. Right? Those are not traditional marketing, avenues a lot of the time, but they are the ways that we were able to learn what our story was, what our impact was. And I believe the other reason I say storytelling is we're doing it in a way that is not exploiting our community. Because sometimes if you go straight with pure marketing, it can get exploitive, whether you mean to or not, right? It's very easy to say, like, look at this person that we helped and we da 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 da. And while I understand the impetus behind that and like the traditional marketing side of why that happens, the reality is it ends up biting you later when your community says, listen, you're exploiting us. We're not going to support you. And you end up building, you almost are the snake eating your own tail. So
What does Arts and Scraps do?
Arts and Scraps is a nonprofit that utilizes recycled materials to build community and empower through resourcing. So there's two main ways that we do that. We have our Detroit Community Store, which is almost like a thrift store for creative materials, but we also have open programming for our community to come and gather and share their own ideas as well as practices as well as actual materials together. And then we have educational programs where we teach science, technology, engineering, and math through creativity to kids across the city and region. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a unique model. There's organizations that do one or the other of those things, but it's unusual that we do both together. Um, but it's not like unique in the world, but yeah, we don't necessarily have a lot of competitors or anything like that. But because of the nature of who we are, we have been building relationships across the city and region for 35 years. And while we didn't necessarily have material resources, we had all of these connections and all of this goodwill in the community. And we had to say, okay, how do we, without exploiting that community, turn this goodwill into revenue? And it meant telling our story. It meant figuring out what is the impact that we were having? How do we tell that story? How do we reach out to that community and help highlight them in a way that also shows grantors and donors and things like that what would happen if we didn't exist, so that they say, oh my gosh, I have to support this organization so that they can support these 500 artists that everyone knows are beloved in our community. So 500 is more like 5,000, but anyway, so it was telling that story because it was very easy for 35 year or for, I'm sorry, for the first 20 years to just kind of accept that foundations looked at us and saw an organization that made crafty crap with kids. And while there is value in that, it's very hard to tell that story in a way that you want to invest in it. Whereas if you see an organization that is making a deep impact on the artistic, creative, and educational community of Detroit, and then see that there are also educational programs that are creating the future creatives of Detroit, that is much easier to invest in, right? It is the exact same programming. Almost none of that has changed. How we do our programming has changed because our community has shared that with us, but it is basically the same programming. But we are telling that story very, very differently because of the narrative building that we've been able to do with our community in order to help us understand and better tell our story.
So, if I heard you correctly, you had been around for 2 decades,
Mhm.
and then you had this jump in revenue. And is it fair to say that it was the story? I think you said it was the storytelling that made the difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, so what was the magic bullet? What was the impetus that all of a sudden you're around for 2 decades, you're kind of saying the same story, or maybe no story,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden you found the kind of the magic. It's not the magic bullet, but the magic key.
Yeah.
What was it? Someone talked to you? Did you read something? What happened?
For us, our founder had the realization that marketing dollars are almost always at least a one-to-one in out, and can have the impact of helping your organization grow while doing that. And so she finally was like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm going to invest in marketing. So she applied for a grant for our first full time employee ever at 20 some years, I think 23 years in, that employed our first full-time employee that was wearing many many hats, but one of them was marketing. So we finally had strategy and like actual push on marketing. And it's not like when we first started we were telling our story perfectly in any way shape or form. And I would say there was a second layer to this. That was that first layer was, oh, we're going to invest in this, we're going to invest. We had a website, but like it was kind of the dawn of social media, and we jumped in with both feet. We were a very small organization that was on Facebook very, very early. We were, doing a monthly newsletter and things like that, but we weren't necessarily doing it perfectly or well. But the second piece was that we had a grant in 2016 to 2018 that focused on community engagement and learning what our real story and impact was. So those timelines are very different from each other. We had to start. We had to invest in marketing first, and not say, well, we're not going to do it perfectly, so we're not going to do it at all. Like, you have to jump in. You have to use interns. You have to, use Canva for free and all those different things. Now we're to a place where we can pay a marketing consultant to do our graphic design, pay another person to do content creation, get grants to invest more in community engagement and learn our story and data and qualitative and quantitative, all those different things. But you have to start somewhere. And I think at
So,
the beginning, it was only like $5,000 that we actually invested in marketing, but that $5,000 gave $5,000 as well and grew what we could do, right? So you kind of have to grow that over time.
I always have a lot of guests that are consultants themselves, right? And the grants that are there grants that are out there that are, unrestricted? Well, I wouldn't say unrestricted, but are there specifically so that smaller nonprofits can bring on a consultant to help build their marketing?
They're very, very rare. They're typically called capacity building grants, and they're going to include a bunch of different things, but sometimes they will include marketing. And for us, it was actually a community foundation, the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, and their general grant program is, we want an idea that will be at least partially programmatic and partially capacity building. We want to invest in what's going to help you grow. And so it was a grant that helped us have someone go full time from part time, that was for marketing, for community programming, for investing in infrastructure. We're only talking about the first of the 3 points. The second one is policy and procedure. And that's very boring stuff. But if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to handle the growth that you have. And so that was the other thing we invested in very early in this process, late in the game for a nonprofit. But
Yeah, I mean, so um, did you ever consider at the time going to one of your donors and saying, "Can you give us $5,000 because we really feel that you can do your own story, but because we really feel if we put some money into marketing and storytelling, and let's put it down to maybe better, a little more common language. We believe if we learned how to say what we do better, that we would be able to grow this organization better through grants and through other fundraising. Because the fact of the matter is, a lot of your donors are business people anyway. They understand the value of that. Was that ever a consideration to going to the existing donors and asking for money?
I would say when we made that initial jump, we did not have donors like that. We didn't have donors we could go to and ask for $5,000 for anything. Now we do. And in our next phase, that's part of what we're going to be doing. But it's very, very hard when you're a very, very small nonprofit and your highest donor is $1,000 and you have two of them.
Yep.
To then say like, I really want you to focus on marketing, because when you're working with donors, you have to go to them with what they care about. And it's very rare that someone's like, oh man, I really want to invest in marketing. It's
Yeah.
usually the other way around, to be able to say like, oh, you really care about fiber arts. And we really think we can build this fiber arts program if we invest in marketing to be able to tell the story of fiber arts in Detroit or something.
You,
I'm
you know
just,
what
that's
though?
off the dome. But like,
Just just to
you
re.
almost have to spin it.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine.
Um, I would respectfully disagree with you in the idea that donors would not see the vision of that.
Mm,
If I'm on a board of two nonprofits, and if they came to me and they said, you know, we don't do any uh, marketing, we don't have, and if they came to me with a plan, right?
yeah.
Let's just say that, okay? They came back to me a plan and says, we want to grow our organization from $250,000 to $500,000, and we don't, you know, we do a great job of servicing our clients, of really delivering on the message, on what we say we're going to do, but we're not good at raising funds and getting this organization to the next level.
Yes.
In order for us to do that, could you give us $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 so that we can either hire somebody that would be able to help us with marketing, or hire consultants that can come in and help us grow that? I would say sure. I would say
Yeah.
sure. I'd say that makes complete sense to me, because I would love the idea that my $5,000 would now turn into $20,000, which then would feed back into the organization and help the cause that I really care about.
Yeah.
So I have a hunch here. Is it fair to say that your organization is really good at helping deliver to your clients, to your the people that you're trying to help, the cause? Is it fair to say you're really good at that?
Yes.
And is it fair to say what you're not great at has been building the organization as far as revenue goes?
Yes. We do not have investment in that part of the infrastructure. That's what we're doing now, right?
Yeah.
Because at 280,000, every single penny was going into program delivery,
Yeah.
right? Until we hit 5,000, we could put into marketing.
Yeah.
And so now, and that the other thing that happens in those really, really small nonprofits is you have all these gaps of things that you're doing for free, or you're paying for yourself, or you're da 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 da, right? So there's also these hidden gaps within your budget. Like a big one for us is we're paying like a third of regional average for our rent, which sounds great until you have to move, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those small nonprofits have to find ways to invest in that
Yeah.
infrastructure in order to be able to grow, because you can only serve as many people as you can pay to serve. And so you have to be able to grow that piece of who you are. And like I said, we're still 50% earned income, 50% unearned. And, a lot of nonprofits get knocked for being less than 20% earned income. And I would say it's actually not super healthy to be that high on earned income either, because then you're leaving money on the table somewhere
Mm.
for unearned income, right? And that's where we've been. That's where we're just coming out of and getting into a place of growth where we can finally get more invested in infrastructure, in fundraising, in grant writing, all those different pieces. So, but capacity building grants, that is essentially what you're talking about. And once you have one capacity building grant, it's a lot easier to go to donors and say, hey, we have this capacity building grant and we are trying to get to XYZ goal to really fulfill this thing. And we have this whole plan put together that is, at least partially funded, da, da, da. So then you can say to donors, your investment is going to go into this part of this capacity building fund. So
Yeah, so my observation in the 14 years that I've been with Financing Solutions and dealing with executive directors all the time for the line of credit, and in my experience prior to that as well, is that what happens is nonprofits start because the founder really, really cares about the cause, and they're great at delivering the cause. They're really working on the cause. The way that a nonprofit gets out of being small is when the executive director, in this case, the founder, um, switches from spending all their time in the cause
yes.
to switching the majority of their time in fundraising. And a lot of executive directors feel really uncomfortable doing that. They don't like it.
Yeah.
There's courses out there that teach executive directors how to do that. There's courses out there that teaches board members how to raise funds and how to ask.
Yep.
And the reason I'm saying that is that if there's a course, then we know that there's a problem. So
Yes.
if my 2 cents here would be is if you want to build your organization, the executive director has to switch from
Right.
the hands-on day-to-day helping their cause to fundraising. Rather it be grant writing, rather it be talking to donors, fundraising campaigns, fundraising events. Even then, that's fundraising events is still, that's too hands-on.
Yeah.
If you want to get to that $500,000, $1 million, $3 million mark,
Yeah.
you got to spend all your time on fundraising. So would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I would say, having lived it, that it's likely going to take a percentage increase over
Yep.
time, right?
Yep.
So, as much as you want to just say, I'm just going to switch into all fundraising, the reality is your organization still relies on you to do those day-to-day tasks until you get it off your plate.
I agree with you.
If it's 5% every month that you increase your time that's going into fundraising, grant writing, etc., that's great, right? But you got to be consistent about getting that percentage up and up and up, and you have to build the infrastructure underneath you in order to replace yourself, whether it's whatever it is, right? Whatever the solution is, to get more and more of your time into that fundraising and grant writing in order to grow, because
Yeah,
otherwise you could just be the operations manager of the organization forever, and if you don't have an executive director that is actually doing strategy and fundraising, you're not going to get there.
No, and I think if you are the executive director and you haven't made this change yet, I agree with you. I think you have to. So, I mean, one of the ways that I would suggest you do this, and the reason why I say this is that I did this personally, is, I would say, okay, on Fridays now, every Friday is dedicated to me doing fundraising, rather it be filling out grants, which, rather it be talking to donors, rather it be coming up with fundraising campaigns. So that you make that little change,
Yep.
and out of 5 days you work, maybe you work 6, that one day you are making the switch to a mindset change. And then I think I agree with you. And then over time, maybe you do 2 days and 3 days. And I think many of the people listening find that that whole idea to stay, they don't like it. They don't like it. They think it's too much business instead
Yeah.
of, right. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I've definitely heard that. I mean, even as somebody that like started with working with kids, like worked with kids since I was one and have taught myself how to be an executive director, it is hard. But I think you're right. And if you can't start with your entire Friday, start with 2 hours.
Agreed.
You know what I
Agreed.
mean? Like
Yep.
whatever bite-sized chunk you can take. And I would say invest the same amount of time in training yourself, right? Whether it's podcasts or courses or whatever it is. If you are coming from that service end of things, you have to teach yourself finance because you can't talk to a donor if you don't know what you're talking about. You have to teach yourself storytelling so that you can actually tell your story when you're talking to that donor or whatever it is. You have to teach yourself community engagement so that you can know what your story is and then be able to deliver it. There's a lot to learn when you're coming from actual service. So make that investment at the beginning, the same amount of time teaching yourself as you are actually doing the fundraising. And that will also help you feel more comfortable getting into it. At least this is what's worked for me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I'm doing an hour of doing donor work, I'm also doing an hour of learning how to work with donors, whether it's the finance or whatever it is. So that has helped me then push and push and push more into actually having my job be working to get the money in. So invest
Yeah.
in yourself. I know it feels weird to say that as a nonprofit person, especially if you're a service, direct service person, but it's not for you. It's for the organization. So
Yeah. I think there's a couple of recommendations I would make too. First thing is, this is like our 300th plus episode, right? The Nonprofit MBA podcast. There's a lot of podcasts on this that I have here that from experts about fundraising,
yeah,
right? There's a lot of them. Just so start off by listening to the podcast. Number two is find some good books. There's some great books out there. There's an old adage. It says that if you read 3 books on the subject, you're an expert on it.
Hmm.
And so that's the second thing. The third thing, what I would go out to do is, and these are all things that I've done. So, I may not have done it in a nonprofit world, but I've done it in the business world.
Yeah.
The third one is I would find a mentor, somebody in the nonprofit world who's an executive director
Yes.
of maybe a 10 million or better a year nonprofit, and ask them to mentor me and say, listen, I just need help. Can you go out to lunch with me once a month
Yes.
and give me some insight as to what you think I need to do next?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of an accountability. I had a mentor for 20 years. He was fantastic. And that's what happened. I actually met him every quarter for lunch. And, I grew a lot as a business person by having him there. And he was a great cheerleader for me as well.
Yes.
So, I think that it's some ideas for people to consider who are,
Well, and I agree with all those. I would actually add one,
okay.
which is I would form a group of other executive directors that are like in your same
Yep.
area or maybe just above you, right? That you can bounce ideas off of, talk about strategy with. There's so much that can be isolating about being an executive director. Having that group, even if you meet once a month and it's open to whatever topic somebody needs to talk about. That's what our small group does. There's like 6 of us, but we know we have values alignment with how we run our organizations, and we know that we're all on a growth path. Some of us met in a program, some of us didn't. We just found somebody else that matched our group. But having that space to be real with each other, talk strategy, talk what you need at like the same level is, I think, just as important as having that mentor that's like where you want to go.
I completely agree. I had this great idea. I mean, I belonged to the Entrepreneur Organization, which has 15,000 members, but my forum group, which was made up approximately of 9 people,
Yeah.
has been together for 25 years.
That's awesome.
And what's so interesting is that we had people who cycled in and cycled out for various different reasons. But the 9 guys that stayed in the group that 25 years, we all did very, very, very well.
Yes.
And so the reason why I'm saying that, especially if you're starting a new group, is the number one golden rule for survival, if you're in the wilderness like Michigan, is staying together. That's the
Yes.
number one rule.
Yes.
And the reason I raise that is it can be rocky sometimes when you're in the group. Maybe you get somebody who dominates time. Maybe you get somebody who's just out there. But if you stay the course, you all grow together. And
Exactly.
I was with these guys since we were 30 years old, and nobody knew all the answers.
Right.
Nobody knew any of the answers.
Exactly.
But
That's a great secret of life. We're all
yeah, and
figuring it out.
and they're my best friends now. So I mean, that's
Yeah.
the other part about that. So you are 100% right in that it's even more of a support group
Yes.
than it is a learning group.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
So is there an organization out there that puts together executive directors into forum groups?
Some regional groups do. So, like in Detroit, there's Culture Source, and they're a regional group for creative and artistic organizations, and they have an executive director group. I will say that's like 50 or 60 executive directors that all come together like once a quarter. The smaller group, though, we kind of formed on our own. Like
Yep.
I said, some of us went through a training together. Some of us just knew each other personally. But I believe why it really works is that values alignment, because there are definitely different schools of thought on how we serve our communities, and it's much more difficult to learn from each other if you don't have that values alignment. And so we bring people into the group based on knowing that we have those value alignments. But it has definitely been something we've done on our own. Even though actually I think almost all of us are part of that regional group as well. So
Yeah, what's interesting, like I just formed a group on my own of retired men
mm,
who, because we all struggle. I'm semi-retired now, and we all, when people, regardless of male or female, when you go into retirement, it's such a challenge to
yeah,
find out what to do with your time. Um, and so, I mean, I just formed the group. So, like you're saying, reaching out to other executive directors who are maybe the same size as you. The fact of the matter is, if a executive director is running a $10 to $20 million nonprofit, they're not going to want to be involved with people who are running $250,000.
right,
I mean, they'd be willing to be a mentor, but they're not
exactly,
going to want to go to a forum group. They're not going to learn a lot. They want to be with $50 million executive directors. So I think, Ange, what you're saying about starting your own group, and it's not a bad idea. You only need 3,
right,
right? And
yeah,
then and then usually they know somebody too. So
exactly,
um,
exactly,
so we're gonna wrap it up. We only got to one topic today. I was gonna, I asked you for 3. We only got to one,
yeah,
but I do think it's the most important one.
yeah,
And what you're basically saying is, start to get your story compelling, authentic. That's the new word. And I'll just leave you with this thought. I had this one employee who came up to me when Lady Gaga came out, when she first came out, and Lady Gaga was the first person who was a star who was totally authentic.
mm,
It's just like Taylor Swift now. They are who they say they are, and
yes,
they don't lie about it.
yeah,
And that's really what we're talking about with storytelling,
mhm,
right? Um, so I think that's really what you're saying to us today, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. I would say you also may need to root out what isn't authentic within your organization, right? What are you saying you're doing that maybe you're kind of giving lip service to instead of actually doing? correct those parts so that you can tell that story as well, right? But yes, I think it's very easy for people to get behind something when it is authentic and impactful, and you can tell that story. Absolutely.
I completely agree. Well,
Yeah.
it was a great podcast, and that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank so much Ange um, Adamak for coming on today from Arts and Scraps. And if you like today's podcast or any of the other ones, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcasting app. And if you, again, are interested in a line of credit for your organization and would like to learn more, please go to the nonprofitmbapodcast.com website. And Ange, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, you can hit our website, artsandscraps.org, and you can also just reach out to me by email, Adamak, ADAMIAK, at artsandscraps.org.
Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So it's February, like we mentioned, to 2025. It's start of the new year. Hopefully, by this time, everyone's New Year's resolutions has not come has gone to crap. But I always say this at the end of the end of the year and the beginning of the year. Well, I say it at every podcast, and that is, you guys are out there. The listeners are out there trying to solve major world problems, local, state, federal, worldwide, and saving the world takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of burnout in this industry, and we really need you. I know that Ange and even me, I mean, we're trying to do our part, but you guys are out there, and Ange is out there every day trying to really make a difference. And you just got to remember that you have to come first. You have to come first. It's like when you're on a plane and you have a kid, you got to put your oxygen mask on first. So make sure you're doing those things that allows you to be present and have the energy for the long term. That means exercise, eating right, praying, meditating, whatever makes it you feel like it gives you energy back. And don't be afraid to take a day off. You need to kind of regroup and recharge. So, just do your best. I thank you for trying to make the world a better place. We really need you. And other than that, I want to thank you for listening to the Nonprofit MBA podcast. Have a great day, everybody.